like that in the entire facility because its capacity is so large that to take away even one restroom would violate the capacity code. So that's kind of what these numbers kind of represent. And like I said, these specifically focus on those public facing facilities. So the story could, is a little bit different when you look at all of them, but that's kind of the overview.
Okay, can you explain the capacity code? So would that be like Classic Center?
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Classic Center is a good example.
Yeah, and we can ask, our.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So the plumbing code, determines the number of bathrooms and the number of specific fixtures needed according to the occupant load of the building. So let's say you have a building with 200 occupants, and I'm just throwing these numbers out there. The plumbing code might say you might need one toilet for every 25 people. So if you have 200, then you're gonna need 8 toilets. And currently the code says they need to be divided equally among men and women. I'll tell you that we're under the 2018 codes right now. The 2021, 2024 codes have already started being more aware, I guess you would say, of the need for non-gender restrooms. So I think that the requirement that you have a men's and a women's is going to come out of there. But you still need a certain number of fixtures. And let's say you've got a bathroom that has 3 toilets in it. So 3 people can use it at the same time. If you change that to a non-gendered restroom and put a lock on the door, then you can only count that as 1 fixture. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to change a single-use restroom to gender neutral, but it's a little more difficult for multi-use restroom.
Okay.
And looking forward, one of the things we heard from y'all was in new facilities, you do want to see those single use. So Costa, for example, is going to have all single use restrooms.
Right.
So for the buildings, with the 3 stalls, would that be something that we would just decide as a committee that we would keep as a single use, a men's or women? That way we don't get so, go down a rabbit hole as to, well, we're gonna lock it on that one person use.
Yeah, so, and that's kind of what y'all told us earlier on in this discussion was to look at all the restrooms and see which ones potentially could be switched without, having to do construction.
Right.
And so conceivably, if we're remodeling a facility, we could upgrade that as part of the project. You'd have to add restrooms likely. But so what staff's done is kind of followed y'all's recommendation from earlier, which was, hey, is this a restroom that we can switch to single use and also meet code? If so, then let's go forward and try to figure out how we switch that. And so and I think that's what we're showing here. Is for this restroom to be easily renovated to be gender neutral.
And I think with that pie chart so some of these, before we had more formal conversations with talking about capacity code, so some of those may refer to, already single use ones, but it also could refer to something that has maybe it has 2 stalls in it, or maybe it's a single stall, but it also has a urinal. And so it's it gets into a gray area where you could probably easily do the construction and it may not affect code. But it would definitely need more study before you could say, go ahead with this project.
And you'll see kind of how we plan to handle that later in the presentation.
Okay, so switching over now to kind of thinking towards the future, where our efforts are going to go. So as we've talked about, the survey that we did is simply a sample of our facilities. So it's not fully comprehensive, as we've mentioned. So just getting more information on this topic and more concrete details, kind of like we've talked about, is only going to help us address this situation. So ultimately this comes down to, as Josh has discussed, that idea of an ADA coordinator. This is someone who would be more of a professional or expert in this field, who would probably have additional guidance on how we can best move forward on improving accessibility, improving inclusion in terms of the bathrooms. And then, so with that, we have some priority areas of improvement. So kind of a rehash of what we talked about, but overall standardizing signage across our facilities would be really important, just to maintain consistency. And when someone goes to a facility, on one side of town and goes to another one later, they're seeing the same thing and they're knowing what to look for to get to services. Refreshing the parking spaces, this is something else that we could tackle fairly quickly. Whether that's repainting or just simply updating spots, that may need to be made into accessible spots. And then with all of this, developing a phased improvement plan for how we want to go forward. What are the things that we want to tackle in the short term? What are some things that we might need to be working on well into the future? So I'm gonna pass it off to Molly now, to just kind of give some more concrete next steps.
Yes, so our specific next steps, again, just having that ADA coordinator to be able to conduct a formal comprehensive audit of all facilities. Review the effects of the City Hall pilot signage program that's already been initiated. For example, the elevator signage that you have to see right outside. And then implement recommended phase 1 improvements, and our ADA coordinator will be able to help us understand the areas of need to implement our phase 2 and phase 3 changes.
All right. I know in November, we talked about the ADA coordinator, that we needed, this is me to the committee, inclusion office, is there a certification or training that staff can do to be ADA qualified versus, from my train of thought, once we get the facilities updated, get the signs up, what would be the need of paying someone annually for an ADA coordinator? Like, what would that position be?
Right. So as far as an ADA coordinator, that is a very complex job, because when we think about ADA, it's not just thinking about just one specific project. It goes into all areas, all the way down to programming, and even it can go into websites, accessibility, when you look into the digital spaces, all comprehensive things. Now, as far as there's training, there are trainings that can be taken, but a lot of times persons do go to school for this type of work. So that is a specialty area. Now, are there trainings by practice? Yes. I've done some trainings before in just other various roles, but there are actual schooling that some persons do actually go to. Now, whether leisure service can, I know they have a position within their area that looks specifically at how programs are conducted and needs there. I don't know if that might be something as safety and risk from a human resources portion too. But
Yeah, and so just adding on to Dr. Epps, where that is located now is in HR. So the HR director is assigned this duty on top of everything that they do. And then the risk manager is also the other person. So one of the things we're trying to do is give capacity where it needs to be, so the risk manager and others can do contracting appropriately as well. So one of the thoughts here is this could be a win-win where it opens up some of that time. And the assistant HR director, Laura Welch, is here. I would love for her to speak just a little bit to the potential of this position to answer that question, because she has looked into that a little bit.
Yeah, I've researched other ADA coordinator positions across other governments, and they run about, based on our pay scale, between a 120 and a 124. Right now, we've asked for the 120 level through the 607 budget. That's our safety and risk budget. Definitely need support in this area if we're gonna launch this effort and really stay on top of it the way we should. The coordinator would be very busy, I assure you, from now in perpetuity. In addition, we also have employees on a regular basis that require ADA accommodation, and so that person could be involved in those discussions as well. But it needs to be someone that is at the professional level that can interface well with central services and within the safety and risk functions, and that we are limiting our liability in this area.
I have a question or a comment. Sorry, this is Melissa. I'm joining remotely. I don't know if y'all can see me. So would this position be housed in the inclusion office or in HR?
No, yeah, and we can bring y'all more information about this next month, but this responsibility has floated around departments. For a little while, it was actually the Office of Operational Analysis had this responsibility. That was then, when Crystal Coburn started here, that responsibility was passed on to the inclusion office. And what we found was that was too big of an ask for the inclusion office because it was taken away from their core duties. Though you can understand why it might be there, it just didn't work at the time. And so at that point, it was handed off to HR, which is where it was before it went to operational analysis. And so what we're trying to do, conceivably, you could put this position in a different department too. But what we're trying to do is give capacity to HR to accomplish what we haven't really been able to accomplish in this area. So right now, departments are doing the work they have to do related to ADA, and we don't have a centralized focus on it, so we're missing some of these things, like that ADA transition plan. We need to go do it. Who's gonna do it? Technically, it should be HR, but do they have the time? So that's kind of where we're at.
So would it be up to us to decide, whether it would go to the inclusion office or HR, or do you guys see that HR is probably the best place for it to be housed?
Well, I think, we would recommend HR. I think the conversation would happen as part of the budget process. So I think for the GOC, if you want to make a recommendation either for the position or not, I think that would be where the GOC is. And then if you recommend it, you'll see this as part of the budget process. And then we can have those discussions, in terms of the position, where it goes.
I think that now, since we're about to enter into budget season and we see that this coordinating position is a position that needs to be a part of that conversation, then we shouldn't hold it until next month.
Okay.
So my experience has been that position like that has been an HR. That's kind of UGA.
Yep.
Is the ADA coordination is HR. One of the things I want to harp on, we had talked about a lot, is the handicap accessibility.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about this, when I look at this building and where people that's handicapped can get in there, sort of awkward, again, if and when, if we decide to get this position, then we just look at the makeup, how people get into certain buildings also. I think that can be part of the ADA coordination job, because I hate how we gotta sit up here. It's just not a good concept how people can get into the building, that's wheelchair bound. So again, I think that would be some of the things that they could recommend. So, but if I have my brother, I just want to make sure it should be an HR.
And so I really think this team did an amazing job. And so what you see here, these phase one improvements are what the team is recommending that we can go ahead and do now without a position. And then what they shared was that, think about it in terms of phase two and phase three. If we have this position on board, that position, after y'all make your recommendations next year into the future, we'll be able to add to this work. But these are things that we think we can go ahead and get started, whether we have a position or not. So that was one of the things we want to make sure. So did y'all want to share anything about this slide?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of covers a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, but these are things, like Josh was saying, that are pretty easy and straightforward. We already know how to do them, and Beth was able to come up with some numbers for how much it would cost per unit. There's a lot of to be determined for the quantity of each of these things. The first one on there, that's switch gendered signage for non-gendered signage at existing single unit restrooms. That's kind of like the easiest one that we talked about. That number 24 represents the public facing ones that I took a deeper dive into, that the chart kind of looked at. There may be more that fall into that category, and I don't know, Beth, if you have any numbers on that, but there may be more that we can do than just that. But I would say that's the easiest one. And then re-signing and restriping the ADA parking spots. Those are things that the county has done and knows how to do, and those are kind of the numbers associated with that. And installing ADA compliant signage, that's kind of what we're gonna use the City Hall pilot program. We're looking at kind of how it was done and like the, kind of the procedure, getting that down, and then kind of putting that into practice in other buildings where we see a shortcoming. So.
Question, 1, 2, and 3, can we do that now? Do we have that budget, or is that part of the budget for 2025?
So it's a good question. I know Beth and Andrew are both here, so, and James as well, so y'all can speak to current financial ability, but the top one, it's about $1,000 to do that, right? So I think that's something potentially we can do in the current budget. What we don't know is how many of the other things there are, so I don't know if Central Services would want to, comment on that, or kind of where y'all are at, but.
I just think, like, especially the missing or faded signage and the faded striping, like that's a serious issue when it comes to folks, trying to find parking and,
And Beth's already started on some of that, so they're not really waiting on some of this because we know we have to do this, but you want to speak to that a little bit, Beth?
I can say that on our non-gendered signage for existing single unit restrooms, not counting Costa, there's 110 of the restrooms that we looked at, so plus the 24 that Labor Services has. So, then you've got the restriping of the parking spots. The one thing that we're running into that with, that's easy to do, weather permitting, it's gotta be the right temperature outside, but we're having trouble getting the paint. It's hard to get the paint right now. That is one of the obstacles we're running into, is the special paint. But that's easy to do, It's about $50 a parking spot to do, it's not expensive.
Yeah, so James, anything else to add to that?
No, I just think that when we are looking at this, it's the going through and finding all of the spaces. That is going to be, I think our bigger task is, going through there and having a staff person go through and like, all right, we've got 10 spaces at this facility, and then we're moving throughout the entire county and all of our spaces. So, and like Beth said, weather permitting with spaces and, it's 12 degrees outside. It's gotta keep those things.
Yeah, so to answer your question, Chair, I don't think there's any reason for us we don't need to wait for a budget for next fiscal year for these, if y'all want us to really make this our first focus.
do y'all agree with that?
I do.
Okay. Do y'all make that your priority, first focus? All right.
And then we can bring back more formal numbers once we have a firm sense on quantity for phase one. And then anything that's not in phase one, we'll put towards phase two.
Do y'all like the signage that's in City Hall for the restrooms?
Yes, ma'am.
Nice.
We're okay with that sign?
Cool.
Right.
Do y'all wanna see the outside sign? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's only one of them, I got different, so of course, there's different signs that say different things, but that's what they look like. If you agree with them,
that's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, any other questions on this item? Is there do y'all wanna us to move forward with a report on this, or you want us to come back next month with more information about some of these items?
Let's just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so do y'all wanna formally vote on that then?
Motion, somebody?
I would like to make a motion to move forward with the re-signage of the ADA parking spots at facilities with missing or faded signatures and the stripes. Did I say it right?
Yeah.
All right, motion.
Second.
And everything on phase one is what you're saying?
Everything
Okay.
okay.
No, I like what you're doing. I just wanna make sure
I was on a roll.
Second, Chair.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Great work, y'all. Thank you.
That's great, yeah, look at that.
All right, y'all.
There you go. Yep, that's good. Oh.
Can you move on to the disparity set?
Yeah, David, you're next up. We are in three.
One was very.
Thanks, y'all, for coming. Thanks for coming.
Should have put down about this here.
Okay.
Everybody's in that time.
All right, y'all. Chair, did you want me to introduce this?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we're moving right along. Today, we're going to talk for the first time about recommendations related to the disparity study. And David our finance director, David Boyd, will kind of walk y'all back through kind of some of these key dates that we've been through in this work. But what you find in your packet today, what we emailed last week, is a draft policy that potentially we could utilize. We wanted to bring y'all something to react to. And so David's got, and we'll share these slides to the public that are watching. But David's got some slides to kind of walk you through the key points of this policy. So hopefully, you don't feel like you need to see every page of this during this discussion, but it's something for you to refer to as he talks about the pages, and then you can reflect on after the meeting too, so you've got the draft. But with that, I want to recognize the finance team here. Thanks y'all for being here and thanks for all your work on creating this draft policy. And with that, I'll kick it to David.
Okay. Well, I thought it might be good today to quickly go through where we've been, where we are. And so my first slide on here, were you controlling? Who's controlling this? Oh, there you go. Okay, sorry. My first slide on here just kind of goes over the historical MBE policy program that we had from November 94 to June 2011. I've heard that mentioned several times. We need to understand that that policy was a lot different than what you would see from a disparity study recommendation. So if you look at the fiscal year 10 annual report, you'll see that this program applied to purchases above 5,000. But what's really different is that it's centered on participatory goals, not spend or dollar spent goals. So the disparity study looked at how much money was being spent for MBE, WBE, and so forth vendors, whereas the old policy basically looked at, well, how much participation can we elicit from MBE vendors? And so in 2010, you've got 10% of the vendor database was the goal for MBE to be MBE vendors, and it was 4%. So they never quite got up to 10% in the span of this program. But that just goes to show you that when you just set participatory goals, if you don't really have the data to support that, if you don't really know how many vendors are out there, it's hard to set 10% as a goal. I will note all this started out as 5% in the beginning, I think in 94, and then changed to 10% in 97. They also had a goal of 10% of solicitations go to MBE vendors. They actually exceeded this 22%, but the credit was given primarily to the Georgia Procurement Registry listings, primarily because that's run by the state. The state certifies the vendors. And when you put a bid or a proposal out there on the GPR, any vendors that they have out there that are listed as MBE are gonna, and meet that project code, automatically get a solicitation. So, and they give you those records at the end of the process. So the GPR is primarily responsible for ensuring they reach this goal. They also wanted 10% of solicitation responses to be from MBE vendors. They had 9% in fiscal year 10, and it fluctuated year to year. I'm not sure it ever reached 10%, but it was 5 to 9%. Now, when you look at the actual spend in this report, they had 1% MBE spend in fiscal year 10. This dropped from 8% in fiscal year 01 to 2% in fiscal year 02 due to the closure of one MBE vendor. So they had one vendor that was the bulk of almost all the MBE purchases that they had up until it closed around 2000. And then after that, it steadily dropped down to about 1%. So that was the old policy. I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's the old policy. So when we look at the disparity study is looking strictly at spend. How did we spend our money over that period of time? Second slide. So the background. Thought it might be good to just spend a second, since some of you are new on the commission. The background for the study, beginning in February 2020, the mayor assigned to the GLC to conduct a minority, local, and underserved business review related to procurement activities. So discussions went on month after month. The attorney's office looked into it, and by April of 2020, the attorney's office concluded the need for a disparity study if the commission decided that it wanted to establish a narrowly tailored race and gender goal policy. And then by August of 2020, the GLC presented their findings to the mayor and commission. Jump to 2021, in June, the mayor and commission adopted the 2022 budget, and they included $400,000 for a disparity study that was coming from the ARPA fund. Now, I'm really not sure where the $400,000 came from. That didn't come from finance, but somehow or another discussion was held and that $400,000 number appeared. By December, after presentation by MGT Consulting and so forth, the mayor signed the contract with MGT Consulting. In 2022, the disparity study was underway. Now, the disparity study took about 6 months longer than what it originally was proposed. But I think COVID just had a lot to do with that. I think it had a lot to do with their staffing. It took us a long time to get a lot of our data out of our old Eden system and into a format so they could actually, scrub our 5-year data to get their statistics that they needed. But after a year and a half in August, that presentation was given to Mayor and Commission. The objectives of this study, there's 4 main objectives. Number 1, we determine if there are any statistical disparities between the utilization of M/WBEs, that's minority and women business enterprises, compared to their availability in the marketplace. The second objective was to determine if these disparities are consistent with the existence of intentional and/or unintentional discrimination. The third was to determine if there is quantitative or qualitative evidence of discrimination in business-to-business private market purchasing in the 31 county relevant area in which ACC Gov conducts 75 to 80% of the business that falls within the 5 studied industries that are in the report. So one of the major factors that came out of this whole study, I'll just say this here, is that they did not find any, error on the government's part, but when they looked into the private sector and they looked at the amount of purchasing that occurred within the private sector within this 31 county relevant area, they realized that in the private sector, in the business to business sector, there really wasn't a lot of utilization of MWBE vendors. Now, as I understand it, from Supreme Court and Circuit Court rulings, that in and of itself is enough to allow a local government to institute a narrowly tailored race and gender program because you're making up for what's lacking in the private marketplace. Now, we also fell short of what was available too, so it's on both of us. But I mean, I was actually shocked to see that the private sector played a part in this. So the fourth objective was to provide best practices recommendations to assist in the implementation of policies and programs and the establishment of overall aspirational goals. Now, aspirational goals are non-mandatory. I mean, there's a definition in the policy. They're non-mandatory, and in fact, you cannot make them mandatory because then you get into more of a quota system, and that's illegal. And I put the aspirational goals in italics primarily because as the commission, you have the right to choose whether we go with aspirational goals or we don't, and where we use them and where we don't. We'll get more into that in just a minute, but you need to understand that's up to you. Next slide. They looked at our purchasing policy. Basically, I'm not going to go through all of this, but they found out that there were no inherent or built-in barriers to our policy. And, we have policies to facilitate opportunities for MWBEs to engage in procurement and contracting activities. They did find several opportunities that would further enhance the MWBE program and potentially expand the program as feasible based on study results. I put as feasible in italics because the as feasible is up to the commission. Because primarily what that means is how far do you want to go and how much do you want to spend? So that's the as feasible. They also stated that in summary, the review underscores the importance of recognizing that increasing equity and inclusion contracting opportunities has to be an organization-wide responsibility and not just solely the responsibility of the purchasing division. The extent to which Athens-Clarke County increases the participation of MWBEs will be determined by the results of countywide efforts and departments working together to increase awareness, interest, and participation. So if we look at the actual recommendations that they made, race and gender neutral and race and gender conscious. Now, a lot of these that are race and gender neutral, they feed over into the race and gender conscience. I mean, you have to do most of these in order to have the other. But if you don't want to have the other, then you can just stick with race and gender neutral. It should be noted, though, that the race and gender conscious is not a local vendor program. Okay, so if we're talking about the construction industry, which is one of the 5 industries, if we go out and we start soliciting and trying to pursue and setting aspirational efforts for MBE vendors in the construction bidding process, then we may be getting MBE or WBE vendors that come from out of state. They may come from South Georgia. You know, they're not necessarily, probably not going to be from Athens-Clarke County. So if you look under race and gender neutral, number one, their recommendation was to establish a business inclusion office. And the reason they stated this is because when you have a business inclusion office that focuses exclusively on whatever type of program you establish, the results generally tend to be better than if you don't. Number two, you can establish a small business enterprise program. It's been interesting learning about all these different programs. There is no definition of a small business enterprise program. The city of Savannah, as far as I know, they had a disparity study done, went through the whole process, and they ended up installing just a small business enterprise program because that's essentially what they wanted to begin with. So if you look at their policy basically sets up a definition of what a small business enterprise is, and it defines the relative area, which I believe in Savannah is the city limits of Savannah, but other places have larger areas like maybe an MSA area or something like that, just something that is big enough. And so if local vendors are what you're really after, small and local vendors are what you're really after, then the SBE program is what you're looking for. Some places do both. City of Asheville does both. The city of Asheville has a business inclusion office. Another recommendation is expand data collection and management. Yeah, I mean, we know we got to do that. And it's going to take a while to do that, primarily on the vendor database that's within our own system. And we can pull that information from a lot of different areas, and we can also set up a process internally to collect that data for vendors that are not part of a state or federal MBE or WBE program. So, but that's the number one thing we've got to start out with. We have to develop a formal strategy for business relationships with organizations. So, you know, we have to get involved with all these outside organizations that have been holding meetings, contacting the government, interested in this type program. And that's going to be part of the community business procurement coordinator position, regardless of whatever strategy the commission ultimately decides to adopt. And then adopt an audit clause for contracts. One way that you can assist with MBE, WBE participation is by splitting a contract into smaller segments. And all that's explained in the, you know, it's in the presentation they did, but you break it down, it makes it easier for smaller firms to participate rather than just having one large contract. If you want to have a race and gender conscious program or narrowly tailored MWBE program, that's where we're gonna go to aspirational goals. So the policy that you have now is a narrowly tailored policy. So it has aspirational goals in it for the construction and architecture and engineering industries. It also asks you to unbundle contracts. So again, you make them, easier for smaller firms to participate. You implement contract-specific subcontracting goals, and you adopt annual aspirational goals. Now, you have to keep in mind that these aspirational goals, like whatever industries you pick that they apply to, they don't apply to every contract within that industry. Okay, so there are gonna be some times, like if you have an emergency purchase, this policy, this policy makes, those purchases exempt. There are some other situations too that are defined in the policy that are exempt from, these aspirational goals. But overall, your goal is to start setting aspirational goals and getting your big contracts and stuff to hire MBE and WBE vendors. And then you also have an MWBE program sunset. So after about 5 years, legally, you really need to conduct another disparity study, because if you've addressed the issue, then maybe you don't need to continue on with the program, or maybe you need to do it in some other way. But you can't just adopt the program and go in perpetuity with it under the law.
Okay, I don't know where to begin on this one. Do we know how many minority WME vendors in Athens-Clarke County or the surrounding areas?
No.
Is that data readily accessible? Can we find it out, or?
We could probably find it out. I mean, we may have to go back to MGT to find a way to do it. I know Dun and Bradstreet keeps up with that information. Some of that information may be obtainable through the Georgia Procurement Registry. And it's also just gonna be a basis, basically vendors that we have in our database, which come from the surrounding area.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to figure out which one of those are MBE or WBE and classify them as such.
So when I mentioned that because like for us to set aspirational goals every year, it's gonna be hard not knowing, what's out there.
Well, what I'd point you to is, and we don't want to get too much into the policy, but page 13 above the aspirational goals. So those goals were recommended by the consultant of the disparity study. And right above that chart on 13, it talks about the formula that they use to develop those. And so it is based on availability, right? So the difference between utilization and availability. So we might not know the exact number, but we know the percentage that MGT is recommending based on what they found in the market. So our consultant knows, and what they're saying is, hey, this is an aspirational goal based on what's out there.
Okay.
In your county area. Now, we can't tell you the number, but we can tell you the percent, which is kind of almost the same thing.
But we do need to know in our own database, who in our own database is MBE or WBE, because
That's right.
even though this policy does not address it, if you're looking at purchases under $50,000, you're required to get 3 quotes. If we know that we have X number of MBE, X number of WBE vendors that meet certain criteria, let's say some of them, we've got 3 plumbers that are MBEs in our vendor database. When we go out for a plumbing quote, quote's not gonna be over $50,000, we can require that the department that's putting out the quote include one of these vendors in their quote, so that you're at least being participatory in the local market, right? Or at least in our database, I should say. I don't know where these vendors are located, But if they're in our database, we need to know that and we need to include them in just quotes. And we don't have to do just 3, we could do 4 if we had to. So.
So I have a comment. I'm to me, I mean, I remember the initial discussion about this in those early GOC meetings. And from what I recall, the purpose of this investigation was to come up with a way to uplift our own community, to uplift the minority community in Athens that was historically underrepresented in, in benefiting from government contracts and working and basically, employing our own people within our own community. So I kind of feel like, the focus of this program should be on businesses particularly located in Athens or in the surrounding counties, because, plenty of folks in our community work in the surrounding communities, and the owners of those businesses shop and, spend money in Athens. So I'm a little like confused about the idea of a MBE program that, focuses on assuring that we're hiring minority businesses that might not be from Athens, huge, large scale contractors from Atlanta or even out of state, that might tick all the boxes in some percentage rate, rather than focusing on growing businesses within our own community. I feel like we really need to focus on that small business enterprise program aspect of it, to assure that these locally owned minority businesses are the ones that are benefiting most directly.
That'd be kind of hard, right?
Well, if you have, like, it says establish a small business enterprise program, we can do that. I mean, we can look at the city of Savannah and other examples of these programs that already exist. But they are not race and gender specific, because they do not have aspirational goals attached to them. They have goals attached to the location of the vendor and the size of the vendor. So we would have to establish what location we're talking about. So if it's the Athens-Clarke County MSA, area, or if it's just Athens-Clarke County, whatever y'all feel should be established. And then we have to decide on what size they're gonna be. What's the limit of revenues and number of, say, full-time employees? And if they.
Can we establish an SBE that also is minority business focused? SBE for enterprise that kind of focuses on growing minority small businesses?
Not what our aspirational goals, correct?
Well, that's where the aspirational goals come in, and that's where you set up a narrowly tailored. But the narrowly tailored, it's not looking local. It's not looking just at MBE or WBE firms within however you define a local market. It's saying that if you're in an industry, if you're going out and contracting, and you're issuing a contracting bid, your effort is going to be to get, like, whatever the prime contractor is, to include, or at least make a good faith effort to include MBEs and WBEs in that overall contract. But on small business enterprise, there's been some governments that we've seen that started out with an SBE, and then they hired a group to come in and do a disparity study and found out that it really wasn't benefiting MBE or WBE firms, because you're looking at the size and location of the firm.
But I don't think it's an either or, Commissioner. I think it can be both. And what the GOC said back in 2020 was to look into both. In order to do race and gender conscious, we had to do the disparity study. But that doesn't mean we can't do more focused local education and trying to bring those local businesses into the process. And so I think you can do both. The disparity study looked at spend. And so when you look at spend, you got to look at where we're spending our money. And that's the geographic region, the 31, because a lot of those businesses, those types of businesses and the size that are required to build the projects we're building aren't local in Athens-Clarke County or Barrow or Oglethorpe. So that's the nature of it, but it doesn't mean we can't do both, right, Dave? Is that?
Well, we can have, well, yeah, we can. I mean, the city of Asheville does both. They have an SBE and they have, a policy, you know, such as this. But they're two distinct programs.
Mhm.
So you can have both. And it gets back to that deal where if you know who all your vendors are and you have a small business enterprise program, and that's where you really want to focus, we focus just on an SBE, know who all our vendors are. And if we have MBE and WBE vendors within that small business enterprise program, then of course, if we go out for contracts, quotes, whatever, we can ensure that they are included in all those quotes and contracts. As far as the quoting and bidding goes, we're really not setting an aspirational goal, although I guess if we called it under $50,000 construction, which I don't know what that would be, maybe we could. So we can do it either way, but yes, both are possible.
And then
Okay.
building upon that, y'all have also created a position for finance whose job it is to do some of that education outreach, and the finance department has that position already. So that's not a comprehensive SBE program, but you do have you have a resource whose job is to try to increase the number of local businesses that know about what we're posting and have the opportunity to participate.
Well, we have the beginning building blocks.
Yeah.
If you want to go all in and do a full-blown narrowly tailored, and you want to do an SBE, according to MGT, it's probably going to take 2 years, maybe a little more to get that really up and running. Because number one, you've got to expand your data collection and management. You got to know what's out there. And number two, you've got to hire people, maybe have a business inclusion office, to be able to run this program and run it well. It's not really a procurement function. People think it is, but it's not. It's a separate function. It's almost like the internal audit function, because they're auditing the procurement processes that all the departments and constitutional offices are involved in.
Collecting data.
Yeah. And so like in the classic example of a business inclusion office, if you do have aspirational goals or you have SBE goals, then whenever a contract goes out or a purchase goes out for where, you know, let's say it was a bid for construction. Okay, that bid meets the criteria for this policy, it goes out, then you have to gauge good faith efforts. Did that prime contractor engage in good faith efforts to bring in MBEs and WBEs into the fold? What did they do? I mean, there's a whole checkpoint list, there's a whole checkpoint or checklist in here of that. So it really depends on how far you want to go with the particular process.
So again, where would that business inclusion officer be housed? Would that be in finance, or would it be in some place like the operational analysis office?
So it wouldn't be an operational analysis. No, it's, and I know David says it's not procurement, but it is procurement. A lot of places have it set up in their finance department, or it's off by itself, or it's could be economic development. So if it's more of a workforce development, economic development, so there's opportunities to place it somewhere. I think the question for us long-term is, how big is this office going to be? Is this something that we need to just slowly build one position at a time? So it should stay in finance and then we go from there. And that's kind of what our approach has been so far. Or is this something that y'all want to just wholesale from the get-go, put 5 positions out there and just do it? We're not taking that approach right now. So that would have to be something y'all let us know about. Our approach has been slow building blocks. Let's get a policy done. Let's get those aspirational goals. Let's change the procurement process and capture data and see how we're doing, and then potentially bring back ideas on how to add positions. But I wanted to make sure Sherry got it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of more directly address one of your questions, Commissioner Link, which was about whether you could do kind of both in one unit. And I just wanted to confirm that what David Boyd said is correct. Absolutely, we can run two. But we can't run basically an SVE with a minority focus. I think John and I are, and he's joining us virtually, we're both concerned that that has some Commerce Clause issues, and essentially that the argument being sort of discriminatory towards minorities who are not local. So we would just advise if you want to do both, that they are two separate programs, just like Asheville does, we wouldn't try to encourage a combination.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
we
I mean,
got
I
more
am concerned
slides,
too
so-
about recent, Supreme Court rulings impacting this kind of work. There was a long report on NPR a week or two ago that talked about some other communities that are facing challenges with that. And I think, state level governments are starting to challenge some of this stuff.
So I know we got a few more slides, so if we can just get through the slides real quick, then we could talk more about this next meeting, if that works for y'all. Chair, what would you like us to do?
Talk more at our next meeting.
Okay, you want us to get through the last of the slides or no?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just,
Okay, so on slide 7, what the policy that you have in front of you includes, it is a narrowly tailored minority women business enterprise program. It sets aspirational goals. And then parentheses says not mandatory or applicable to all contracts within an industry. We've set this up similar to Asheville, not exactly, but it applies to the construction industry that was studied and the architecture and engineering industry contracts. Now, if you go back and look at our 5-year spend in these two industries from fiscal year 17 to 21, that was 35% of the total dollars spent in these 5 industries. It generally requires prime contractors to demonstrate good faith efforts to secure MWBE subcontractors in projects, and it includes training and workshops for local vendors to get them signed up and to help them if they want to get signed up with the GPR, Georgia Procurement Registry, and so forth. Next slide. Good faith efforts has requirements of bidders and proposers to show an active and aggressive attempt to engage MBE and WBE firms for projects. It'll vary based on project. And examples of requirements are contacting MWBEs, and we're talking about the prime contractor contacting them, working with community business procurement coordinator and MWBE community organizations that we already know are out there, negotiations in good faith, breaking down selections of project work where appropriate.
and so just an example of this is starting on page 21 of the policy, but you can look later, it's kind of what that looks like, some of those expectations.
Right.
That would be set on vendors.
So on slide 9, the applicability of the policy, we took a lot of this from Asheville. Construction contracts, over 300, architectural and engineering contracts, over 50. It would include MBEs, that's defined here, and WBEs, which is also defined here. And just to touch on the model that we used for this policy, because you got to remember, we didn't know anything about how to write one of these policies. So, in the sector, there is no trademark and copyright. So, the City of Asheville inclusion policy was used as the foundation. They adopted a narrowly tailored MWBE policy for their construction and professional services. Now, they chose professional instead of architectural. Asheville created a business inclusion office located under Community and Economic Development Department. And they also created a small business enterprise program. So they got both of them. And I believe the last slide, just threw this in here. If we certify vendors ourselves, we will accept certification by federal agencies. We will accept certification by the state of Georgia, because that's the GPR. We'll also look at certifications from other states if They meet same criteria. And then, we'll have a local option that'll help, alleviate financial stress certification for smaller businesses at the state or federal level.
Do we have capacity to do certifications ourselves? Like, what would that?
Yeah, I think so. I think once we get everything built up in our database and stuff, yes. I mean, it's basically just, checklist may even be in here. So, yes. People just have to fill out the appropriate paperwork, show the appropriate documentation.
So I think the question for the GOC is, hearing this presentation and then, I know you've only had a couple days to look at the draft. What can we do for next month, to provide information for y'all as you think through this?
Like, see the slides.
Yep. We'll send the slides right there.
So, and thank you all for putting this together. Appreciate it. It's a nice way. So, we did this marriage study. My thought process was, once we did this marriage study, we'll go ahead and start.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage study, put it in VOC. I'm not sure how long it's gonna take us to develop it, and we got people in this community that already complained about we hadn't done anything. I think y'all remember, what kind of school district have already started their program? It is marriage study, and they just happen to be in the pyramid. They put theirs in the pyramid. They've already started their program where they're reaching out to vendors, to do, start doing work for Clarke County. So I'm a little disappointed that we sort of getting bogged down. And I know we got to have a policy. I'm a little disappointed that we sort of getting bogged down in this. I'm not sure how long it's gonna take us to put together, but and I said this to the chair. We saw this marriage study, well, I would say, once we got it going, we're gonna hit the ground running. Hey, they told us what we need to do. Let's do it, and let's get out there and start seeing what we can start generating when we start getting contracts and stuff like this. Somewhat disappointed, but again, I do understand we got to put the policy together, but I don't want to get so bogged down that we're 6 months out and we haven't done anything.
Yeah, well, we just hired someone to fill the community business procurement coordinator position. Good. So they start, is it today?
Okay.
So they start today. They already know Munis and all that kind of stuff. And so now we're gonna start out with collection of data. We gotta get our data up and running and know what we have. And that's gonna take some time. That's why we just picked a to be determined, effective date of January 1. It could be earlier. We gotta know which kind of policy we're looking at. We gotta do some of this work, the groundwork anyway, and we're gonna get started on that. And so what we're really asking for is direction as to how far we want to go, because long-term, I think the commission needs to understand, if you're gonna go, say, the direction of Asheville, where you include both these policies, then it's gonna require a thought process of, well, okay, we're gonna get started at this level, but next year we're gonna be asking for a position or two. So just so people are in agreement and understand where we're headed.
Yeah, and we hear you, Commissioner Fisher, and understand your concern. I think our goal, the quickest path forward is for y'all to kind of review this draft policy over the coming weeks, and then next month, if y'all are good with this approach, then we move forward with this policy. And that will help us kick things off beyond what David's office is already doing. So we've started, but to your point, we don't have a policy approved yet, but if the GOC is okay with this approach, this is what we need. I don't think we're asking for positions at this point. We're asking for a policy. We're asking, for now that David's got his one position filled, we might need more support once this gets moving. But we think this is the quickest path forward at this point.
So we'll come back in February, after reviewing the slides and, taking a deeper dive, and hopefully we can move it forward for a March vote.
So we'll just be ready for any questions y'all have about this draft policy. Do you think this is a good one if you want to go with this approach?
And just understand, the school board, a lot of their purchasing is through state contracts.
It is.
So it's a lot more than what we do.
No, I'm asking about that. So we, in the past, we have not used the state person to look at vendors, have we not done it in the past?
We haven't what?
So in the past, when we were looking for vendors to do business with us, have we not gone to the state procurement process to
Yes.
look at vendors?
Well, we've gone through the state procurement process whenever we had to host an RFP or a bid.
Okay.
Because the state law requires us, if we're gonna have an RFP or a bid, we gotta put it out on GPR.
Right,
So yes, that's going out to everybody that's registered through GPR.
okay.
But that does not have aspirational goals attached to it. And it does not have, and it's not a small business enterprise program either. It's not gonna, so,
It's just posting it.
right.
And I can just tell you, on the construction side locally, someone who's been around here long, we don't have a lot of minority, all women-owned construction companies. We may have a few truck companies that can do it, make a quarter, maybe $500,000, and when we start into the millions, we'll have to expand that scope.
Right.
We won't be able to do stuff local. But as Commissioner Lynch pointed, if we can build that company up to start doing those, that'd be great, starting out 50,000, 100,000, and they can build that capacity. But right now, once we start getting to the million, we just don't have anybody local that I'm aware of that can do that type of work. So,
Which is why we're aiming for the subcontractors to some degree too, right, in this policy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what a lot of it depends on. When you're going out for say, let's say we were building the judicial center, and I don't know what it costs, but let's just say $80 million. You were gonna spend $80 million on this. When you go out for a bid, if you had this policy in place, that's where the narrowly tailored goals, the aspirational goals would go into effect on that. So.
Yeah.
And a lot of your bigger prime contractors have that capacity anyway, especially if they're doing state work.
I have a question, just for institutional memory's sake. Does anyone have any recollection of what happened in 2011 to kick out the old program? Does
It was
anyone?
voted.
If you, as far as I understand from people telling me, if you looked at, number one, their goals were participatory, they were not spend goals. So when that one vendor, MBE vendor, closed down in 2000, the amount they were actually spending on MBE vendors dropped dramatically.
So they just
And so-
decided to end the program altogether rather than maybe improve it.
Well, I mean, they were going through budget. I mean,
We don't know for sure, yeah.
if you go back and you look at the government budgeting, the effects of 2008 didn't really hit a lot of governments until 2 or 3 years later. And that's when you had to look at every single position and every
Okay,
dollar.
yeah, that's when there were a lot of cuts, like
Yeah.
But remember, Commissioner, like, in 2020, when we were, and Chair, you were here as well, when we were looking at this, Julie did come, she had retired, but she did come, the previous, division head, and talked about the old program. We'd have to go back to the video, but she did share some lessons learned about the program, what worked, what didn't, with the GOC in that initial look.
I have a vague recollection of that, but I'm just glad we're doing this work, and I'm hoping we can move forward and get some opportunities for, particularly for some of our local minority-owned businesses.
Moving on to BAC.
All right, thank you, Finance, for all that work. We appreciate you. Similar to that, next month, we'll have a draft dirt road policy for y'all too. So we're trying to really tick off some of these things that are on the list. So I know we're doing a lot with 4, so I apologize that we have 4 agenda items. We'll end at 2:30. So we're not gonna be able to cover everything we hope to with BACs. And so the areas we wanted to talk about today, y'all had asked us to bring forward a couple ordinances a meeting at least, so we could begin to go through the list. Yeah, and Jeff Montgomery has done a lot of hard work on this list of BACs. Y'all have the most updated version of it. But Sherry, and Austin and John is online. They're gonna walk us through a couple of the ordinances today as time allows. And then next month, we'll have hopefully less than 4 agenda items. And so what we'll do is we'll share some of the feedback we heard from staff liaisons. So we had a survey of staff liaisons and we had a focus group to learn from them about kind of what they're seeing. and I'll show you some summary level data related to that next month. So we'll hold that for next month and then.
Wishful thinking. We're GLC is gonna be on the move this year, so we're gonna have a packed agenda in March.
Okay, yes. Well, we'll make progress on BAC, for promise. All right, with that, we'll give it to Mary Hans.
All right, awesome. I know we have a relatively short period of time, so what we plan to discuss, and we're not gonna get through it all, are three ordinances that are kind of similar and that they are both relate to advisory boards that deal with beautification and nature. We're gonna start with Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful. The second one is a Pony Rivers Greenway Commission. If we get to that one, that would be great. And then the Community Tree Council is a much smaller ordinance, so most of the elements that are in it are in one of these other two. But I'm gonna scroll down and just kind of walk through a couple of things. So first thing about Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful Board that you may notice is under the powers. It does give them the ability to adopt their own bylaws, which I think is a common ability of most entities. But I do know that there was some discussion with the Mayor and Commission when AIM, when we were talking about modifying their ordinance to allow them to adopt their own bylaws without having to come back for Mayor and Commission approval, because that is how their bylaws are written. And I know there was some question about that. So if the intent of the Mayor and Commission is to make sure that all bylaws of committees or commissions, boards, authorities, commissions need to come back to them, then we would need to change language in a number of these ordinances that do give them that explicit authority without Mayor and Commission approval. Another one that we may want to consider, and I'm sorry, this is really small. I should have highlighted this, but is to solicit and accept donations and appropriations of money, services, products, property, and facilities for use by the advisory board. I think that's a potential area of concern. I mean, do we want advisory bodies accepting donations of, for example, property on behalf of the government without the Mayor and Commission having to review that or even be aware of it? So I think this is an example of some outdated language that maybe is ripe for change.
Okay, now, thought in our last meeting, we said that policy, that needs to come to the Mayor Commission because for legal issues and also, just public facing policies for that. And also the bylaws, I thought we decided that needs to come back to us as well.
Well, all of that would have to be changed by ordinance. So
Yeah.
that's part of the question is, does the body want to recommend that? And does the full Mayor and Commission agree? And if so, then we do actually need to come back and change that, because it's easy for us to say with an entity that either doesn't have an ordinance or has an ordinance that's silent to it, that for instance, donations that they're going to accept have to come to the Mayor and Commission. But this language gives them the authority to accept it right now without any authority from you all. Yeah.
Do y'all feel, can we just go ahead and motion that?
Let's make a motion.
You have to make a motion.
I make a motion that, we change the language,
Go ahead.
in the solicitation and acceptance of donations, appropriation of money, services, products, property, and facilities.
And also bylaws.
And also the bylaws, to come before Mayor and Commission for approval. I'm sorry.
All in favor, say aye.
I have a question. I feel like there should be like a limit to that, because I think of BACs like the Cultural Affairs Commission or even the Classic Center authorities, ones that might have, and Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful, ones that do have some fundraising capacity, and I could see them, having small donations that would compile that could then be used for projects. I would be okay with putting just, a cap on those donations. If somebody's going to donate 50 or $100, I don't think the Mayor and Commission has to approve every one of those. But if there are donations above, I don't know, maybe $1,000 or something, then, I feel like maybe we should.
So like, I'm not picking on this organization, so I truly love them. KACCB, Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful. So they do fundraising every year too for Daffodil, for the little bowl. So where I'm reading if I'm understanding it right, so they will say, hey, Mayor Commission, we're going to accept donations for tulips or bulbs. Approve it. Not like, each individual who donates money, we
Right.
get a report from them. We just get a report that we are going to raise X amount of dollars just for bulbs, for seeds for the daffodils. And we just, it comes before the American Commission and we approve that. So that's how I understand it. Do y'all agree or?
I agree as well.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lee.
My envisioning is, because I sat on the Cultural Affairs Commission in its early years, and I could foresee, some benevolent donor out there saying, hey, I want to donate $1,000 to our public art committee that they can put towards putting up public art in whatever location they feel is appropriate and is approved by the Mayor and Commission. But, I don't think that the Mayor and Commission should have to approve. I mean, if somebody wanted to donate, $10,000 to a particular piece of public art and dictating where that might go and what it is, that's a whole nother thing. But these kind of random small donations to the greater cause of, beautification or public art, I don't think, I just want to be careful with any language to assure that, there is a fairly broad capacity for general public fundraising for the mission of those kinds of committees.
Well, Sherry, could, in the language, we put a specific cap as to what the donation amount is? Because I do think it's important that whether the donation is 1,000 or 1,000,000, because it is a BAC and it was put together through the Mayor and Commission, that it should come before the Mayor and Commission, not to stop anyone's effort, but just so that Mayor and Commission is on notice as to what these BACs are getting. Because to get an ask to say, well, we were created by you guys, but now we don't need you guys to say or give us any, you know what I mean? That's, to me, and yeah, I'm new, but that takes, it kind of gives the BACs their own authority to do whatever, but they were created by Mayor and Commission. So, I think just so that it's our, Athens is already kind of on euphoria, just so that we know, X, Y, and Z share.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts to that. I think Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful is a little bit unique in the sense that it also has a separate 501c3 nonprofit. And so there's probably, I would guess, some muddying of the waters there. And I'm not trying to imply anything inappropriate, it just because I think they were so interconnected when the department or however it's classified was formed. That's probably something we need to talk to them about. I do want to clarify though, before we moved on procedurally, so there was a motion, there was a vote. Was there a second for that motion?
Yes,
Before we voted?
sir.
She did, but I guess my concern is, are we withdrawing the vote? Like procedurally, I'm just worried about how we're gonna log this in minutes.
And Sherry, one other point procedurally, was the motion specifically related to KAACB or was that related to any board authority and commission created by the mayor and commission that has that particular power? And one other thing I'd point out too is if you remember the breakdown of the different tiers, some of those tier 1 entities that we've discussed before, they have their own independent authority to be able to do some things. Some of those authorities do. So
Right.
Understand the language.
Yeah.
John makes a good point.
Yeah. And so, well, to John's point, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. To all of the BACs that were created by Mayor and Commission, I know that the tier 1s are their own authorities, so I wouldn't include them. But like for Athens in Motion, entities, BACs of that was Mayor Commission originated from, those are the entities that I'm referring to.
Tier 2.
Yeah, tier 2.
So, and one other, and this might help y'all
Yeah.
think about this moving forward. One of the things the attorney's office is doing is coming up with a model ordinance. And so maybe what y'all are asking for is for the attorney's office to include this in the model ordinance for tier 2 VACs.
Yeah.
And then the attorney's office, I don't know if y'all will be ready next meeting or the meeting
We
after.
will.
They'll present that model ordinance to y'all to try to inform everything y'all want. As an example, that we would then require all the VAC ordinances to be. And so that would be one thing. So I don't know if you have enough information to know what to put there.
No, I think that makes sense. I think, we probably do need some more discussion, and we're running out of time, about the donations, because I think, for instance, donations accepting land is a very different thing than donations of a certain amount of money.
Right.
So we might want to have a prohibition on, and again, this is entirely up to you all as to what your preference is. But donations of a certain amount of money could have a cap, donations of land could have to come, it's similar to what grants are, quite frankly. Like, grants are typically approved by the manager or the mayor commission, depending on value. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and the other thing I mentioned too is sometimes you may have people that want to donate personal property, and kind of similar to real property, sometimes there may be some liability issues with that. There may be some other things. And so I think it depends a lot on what type of property is being donated, to Sherry's point.
Yeah, absolutely, like a boat, for example.
Well, I'll table my motion until our next meeting,
Yeah.
when we can get some, or after your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I just foresee there being some opportunity for fundraising. I mean, look at the tree council, someone might want to donate a tree planting in the name of a past loved one or something like that. And, I don't necessarily know that the mayor and commission have to approve every donated tree. But yeah, if they were to donate a whole tract of land, that's a whole nother story.
Okay. It looks like we're right at basically 2:29. Do we want to continue or just stop for this conversation?
Let's stop for this conversation and resume at our meeting. Good. Is it February?
Yeah.
It's February.
What's the date on that?
Oh, yeah, February.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sherry.
And we will have, so to her credit, Courtney Davis in our office has done a great job putting together a draft ordinance, compiling different kind of overarching ordinances. So we weren't quite ready to present it for today. We wouldn't have a lot of time, but we'll definitely have it for the next meeting.
February 19th will be the next meeting. Monday. Yep.
I'll be in New Orleans. I'll be coming back from New Orleans.
Okay. Motion to adjourn? All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Good meeting.
Thank you guys so much.
Got through all.
Bye-bye. Thank you all so much.